Scholars across a multitude of disciplines have long been in debate about what constitutes the natural state of social organization. Experts from fields ranging from philosophy to law to anthropology to sociology and, of course, history have invested countless hours and many times piecemeal evidence to argue their inferential assumptions. Unfortunately, all are products of the time and space in which they exist and thus subject to the dominant discourses of their eras, most of which operated under some sort of exploitative and inequitable hierarchy. Needless to say, this influences their inferences to lean towards conclusions that offer rationale to their contextually current realities rather than challenge them. And in the absence of much material evidence, especially written documentation about how early Homo sapiens and even earlier other hominids organized, scholars have been free to insert their own conditioned assumptions to meet their desired cause and effect results. In short, if one exists and perhaps even benefits from a society predicated on hierarchy, inequity, exploitation, violence, and so on, the lenses in which they view other societies will aim to make similar correlations. Likewise, this video will also make an argument about the state of natural human organization. However, the basis for our assertions will predominantly come from the evidence offered by societies that, for a host of reasons presented in other course or channel content, have been often ignored by Western scholarship: indigenous peoples. Many, though not all, of these peoples around the world remained or went back to what's commonly called circular social organization, even after hundreds of thousands of years. It just proved to be more sustainable and thus, what we argue, more natural. Readings such as Donald Fixico's The Native American Mind in a Linear World, Mike Hannis and Sian Sullivan's Relationality, Reciprocity and Flourishing in an African Landscape, David Graeber's The Dawn of Everything, and David Suzuki's From Naked Ape to Superspecies all offer vastly more comprehensive explanations of what we mean by circular. The good news for us is that in addition to all the vetted research work just mentioned, there are swaths of oral histories from long-lasting circular societies. And though we don't have time in this short video to go through multiple examples, we'll briefly mention that primary inspiration we'll use comes to us from the Iroquois or Haudenosaunee League of Peace and Power and their stories of Sky Woman, Turtle Island, and the Deganawidah Epic. For our purposes here, however, we're only going to focus on what the circular way of life might mean for political organization: natural democracy. Like most species, as well as earlier hominids, early humans learned how to meet their needs through observation and testing, or trial and error. Environment played the biggest role in developing various practices, as learning how to secure food, water, and shelter required an understanding of ecological processes, most of which occur in cycles. From seasonal animal migrations to gathering harvests to wet seasons to tide cycles and so on, knowing that survival was predicated on circular, not linear time was key. Additionally, observation revealed that the species that humans shared their space with that were most successful worked together. And it's also argued that a biological imperative exists here anyway. Lone wolves are a romantic fiction. Further, since the circular lifestyle of hunting and gathering required regular movement and migration, people's material needs, access to resources, were often revolving. Observing the life cycle of the food web and the interconnectivity and, importantly, interdependence of all other species, animal and plant alike, as well as geography and much more, revealed a natural democracy. You can cue Elton John and the Lion King here. This is apparent in the Iroquois example already mentioned, as their creation story reveals they wouldn't even exist without the help of a number of other species that helped establish Sky Woman on Turtle Island. Every facet of the observable world is important to every other and votes through interactive participation. Hannis and Sullivan color this further in their work on the Khoisan groups in Namibia and their narrative celebrations of everything from ant colonies to lion prides. Given these certain material realities, social organization naturally followed suit, and thus, so too did political organization. We've already discussed in another video that the first social structure in a circular society is the matrilineal family. For more on what this means, check out the video on matrilinealism. But in short, biological observation not only dictated that women perform the lion's share of creating life, but also sustaining it, and thus were the most important perpetuators of the life cycle. Naturally, their import dictated they should have at least equal, if not more, say in the functions of their society to ensure its success. And since matrilineal practices create literal family circles rather than the patriarchal hierarchies we're more accustomed to, decision-making developed a more inclusive nature. So what do we mean by more inclusive? Well, in sum, humans gleaned from their environment that every participant in an ecosystem was needed and thus equal for all to thrive. When this lesson was mated to the system of a circular family, it became apparent that to maintain the life cycle, all participants were needed, and thus seen as equal, to include the men who we ignored to this point. Their roles as male influences on all children, not just theirs, as they might not even know whose are whose, or hunters or traders, or even external representatives to outsiders, also proved key for sustaining the cycle. Since everyone played a role and were necessary, it seemed only natural that when a major choice needed to be made, everyone should have a say so. In modern terms, an equal vote, just like the way nature operates. All elements vote to sustain life cycles through participation, as already mentioned. It's a natural democracy. In most cases, unanimous decisions were needed for any major change, such as a move or the onset of a conflict. This certainly looks great in small populations, but what happened when it needed to be scaled up? The Iroquois League of Peace and Power offers us a pretty solid example, as some scholars argue it may have had as many as 25 to 30,000 members at a time, and that's a low estimate. Starting from the family circle, another thing that became apparent was that diversifying gene pools was helpful to sustaining the life cycle. So contrary to belief, when groups met another, new, different group, it's unlikely that their first reaction was fear, and even less likely that there was violence. Keep in mind, as already mentioned, the men represented the intentions of the whole group to outsiders, but with the matron's role in the life cycle as the key motivator. It would be in their biological and social best interest to at least make connections, if not integrate with new peoples. After a few stork visits, the circle might even grow, and there might be multiple matrilineal lines. But based on the values already at play, these lines would also merely scale up to what we call clans. Further growth scales up multiple clans into tribes, and in the case of the Haudenosaunee, 5, later 6 tribes formed a league. So how can natural democracy, which often required unanimous decision-making, work with as many as 30,000 individuals? It would take forever. Well, first, let's remember, they weren't in a hurry, so time was not of the essence. Time was based on cycles, not linear. But second, this is where the representative role of the sachem comes in. If a decision needed to be made, conversations would start at the family level and go on until that family reached their unanimous decision. The person who could articulate the family's position best for that singular topic was then sent to a clan council. A conversation among these sachems either led to a unanimous decision and another sachem was sent to the tribal level, or a decision was not reached and the conversation was set back down to the family level. This process went back and forth until unanimously passing at the league level. Ben Franklin himself was impressed watching a mere fraction of this process at the failed Albany Plan of Union in 1754. Certain elements of this process even found their way into conversations at the constitutional conventions, though the U.S. would eventually opt for a republic rather than a democracy, at least at the federal level. Getting back to indigenous examples, and as a brief addendum, these developments likely went through proverbial ups and downs across time and space, and maybe even oscillated, as David Graeber asserts, from democratic to at times, for specific contexts, requiring brief, singular leadership. Though most evidence he mentions points to the fact that even if a single leader was required for a hunt or deal with a conflict or crisis, that individual would not be awarded permanent, coercive leadership over the entire group. In fact, some later Native American practices included ridiculing their best hunters or warriors after their success to ensure they wouldn't get inflated egos, the first step towards revering status. Keep all this in mind as you consider what you think might be the natural state of social organization. For most of the past 350,000 years, by recent estimates, it's likely all people lived in natural democracies. The inequality of state structures, at least the evidence we have of them, is only a drop in the bucket in human history, 15,000 years on the high end. And most certainly their trajectory has proven wildly unsustainable. Whether this is natural or not is of course dependent on what point you're trying to make. What's possible or what is.